And welcome to the rendering part of the tutorial. Last time I left off with setting up the base liquid simulation. I've talked about scene scale and how this affects the dynamics inside the simulator and also the sim times. And then I've created the foam. I've gone through most of the parameters there, and now we are going to take a look at the rendering. And before I start any rendering, I want to create a camera, and I'll create a V-Ray physical camera. So go to the cameras, V-Ray, and V-Ray physical camera. And I'll create the camera from the perspective, so I'll switch to perspective, and you just press the V-Ray physical camera button and drag it somewhere in the viewport, and press Ctrl C, and it will create the camera from the perspective that you're looking at. So I'll just come in here and center the target on the X and Y, and let's take a look. So I'll move this down a bit. So 21, and I will just zoom in a bit. Okay, so let's say 8, and I'll center it on the X and just raise it up. Okay, let's say 35, and I'll select the camera and go here to the modify, and I'll zoom in using the focal length. So I'll start increasing this, and 64 is fine. And I'll also turn off the vignetting. I'll switch the light balance to neutral, and I'll turn off the exposure. I also want to lock the camera so that I don't accidentally move it. So I'll switch the selection to cameras only, and select the camera and go here to the hierarchy link info, and lock all the move, rotation, and scale. So now if I look from the camera, I can't move it, and I prefer that workflow. Okay, and I'll create a light. I'll create a standard target direct light, and I'll use this just for the rendering setup, and then I'll change the lighting to achieve the final result. So just change the selection here to light so that I'll be able to select this, and move it up. That'll be fine. And go here to the properties and turn on the shadows. I'll use a V-Ray shadow, and also here in the directional parameters, I'll set this light to overshoot so that it does not attenuate, and I'll change this later. And lastly, I'll just in shadow parameters, I'll turn on the atmosphere shadow so that I have shadows on my bubbles, because they're considered as atmospheric. And switch back to O and hit render to see what we have. And I'm going to start with the material of the glass. So I'll open up the material editor, and I'll create a V-Ray material. Name this glass, and I'll turn off the diffuse, and I'll set the material to full reflect. And I'll also increase the max depth here so that each ray can be reflected at least 10 times. And I'll turn the refraction to full, and change the index of refraction to 1.45. I'll turn on the effect shadows, and here I'll also increase the max depth, and I'll add the fog color. So something like this, and just change the multiplier to 0.2, and here in the options, turn on the reflect on backside, and apply the material to the glass. And let's hit render. Okay, right now I see nothing because I have a black environment, and my material is completely transparent right now, but you can see my alpha is here. So I need to add some environment, and for this I'll use a V-Ray HDRI. So I'll create this HDRI and load The environment texture that I prepared earlier is just a simple grayscale, and I'll open up the V-Ray properties, and here in the environment section I'll turn on the reflection and refraction environment, and just put the texture here and hit render. And I have to, of course, set the mapping to spherical. Hit render again, and it's a little bit too strong, so I'll just go here to the overall multiplier and decrease this. Let's try that, and that's a bit better. So I can now also get back here to the V-Ray properties, and I'll turn the refraction environment as well, and I'll leave it to the default black color and hit render. Okay, so I have now these reflections on the glass, and I can move forward. I'll move the timeline to some frame with liquid and hit render. You can see this is our liquid, but you can also see this voxelized mesh. And to explain what is happening and why we have this result, I'll go here to the simulator, and here under the interaction you can see we have this object voxels, and it has three modes: the circumscribed, the center, and the inscribed. And to better explain what each one of these three mean, I have prepared some images, and I'll open them now. And you can think of this as our simulator, and these are the cells. And what we've done so far is we've created an object, and then we created a source, and we started filling this with liquid. And what you can see in this image is that all of the voxels that are intersecting the geometry, like this one, are left empty. There is no liquid inside of them. So that is exactly what the circumscribed mode does. It considers the intersecting voxels as solid, so no liquid can go inside of those voxels. And if you take a look at that voxel again, and this time you can see no matter that it's intersecting, we have this voxel filled with liquid. And that's exactly what the inscribed mode does. So it considers the intersecting voxels as non-solid, and it will fill them with liquid. And what the center mode will do is it will check if the center of the voxel is intersecting geometry. And if it is intersecting geometry, it will act as the circumscribed. So this voxel here, you can imagine that its center is somewhere around here, so this one won't be filled with liquid. And if you take a look at this one up here, its center is somewhere around here, so this one will be filled with liquid. And when you enable the liquids option in Phoenix, it automatically switches the object voxels to inscribed, and as a result we get this, which is exactly what we have in our render now. And you can understand why we had the jagged mesh. It's because of the voxels. And to make this nice and smooth, we simply use the rendering gizmo, which will get rid of all these dark blue areas, and we'll end up with something like this. So let's get back here and check this. So I'll go to the rendering, and in order to use the gizmo, you need to be using the implicit surface mode. So I'll switch to implicit surface, enable the gizmo, and pick the glass as my gizmo, and hit render. And you can see my liquid disappeared, and I have this even worse result. And that's because my gizmo right now is inverted. So I'll check the invert gizmo and hit render again. And you can see the liquid is back, and now I have this nice smooth surface. And to compare the inscribed with the circumscribed, you can see this will be the result. With circumscribed, you'll never be able to achieve that nice smooth surface unless you're using some custom gizmos and something like this. And I always recommend, when you switch to liquids, use the inscribe mode, which is set by default, and you have these nice smooth meshes. So I'll close this and continue setting up the beer material. So I'll open the material editor and create another V-Ray material, and I will call this beer, and turn off the diffuse, and I'll make it reflective and refractive, and I'll turn on the effect shadows, and I'll also change the index of refraction to 1.33, and add some fog color, and okay, and I'll just decrease the fog multiplier. And to assign the material to the Phoenix mesh, you actually assign the material to the simulator. So I'll select the simulator, select the beer material, and hit the assign material button, and let's render. And you can see the material is assigned, but right now I don't see it very well, and to see it better, I'll just start rendering the foam. So to render the foam, you need a Phoenix foam object. So go here to the create panel, Phoenix FD, and create the Phoenix foam. So I'll create it here and place it right there, and I'll also color code this blue as all my other Phoenix objects, and link the bubbles to the simulator by pressing the none button, and then click on the simulator, and it will give us a list of all the available particle systems in the simulator, and we only simulated foam, so I'll just select the foam and press OK, and it will ask if you want to use the simulator as liquid, so I'll just hit yes, and I want to render the particles not as points but as bubbles, so I'll set the mode to bubbles, and I'll set the scattering to analytic plus shadows. I'll give the bubbles slightly yellowish color, something like this, and let's see, change the refraction index to 1.3, and here in the size section I will turn off the size distribution, because I've already set everything related to the size in the simulator, and I don't want any additional distribution, so I'll just set this to 0. And here in the bubbles section, I will just make the highlights of the bubbles a little wider, and I'll decrease the multiplier so that they are not very strong, and let's hit render. And the foam starts appearing. And you probably notice this gap between the foam and the glass, and that's because the foam is an atmospheric and V-Ray does not know how to treat it in this case. So to help V-Ray with this task, we just enable the glass option in the foam shader, and this image shows the difference between the glass correction turned off. You can see this gap between the glass and the foam, and when the glass correction is turned on, we have this nice accurate result. So let's try this with our render. So I'll just stop this and enable the glass option, and click the none button and select the glass and hit render. And okay, it works, and let's check the other side. and the glass correction is okay, but I have these lines, and I'll just get back to this image which we have looked at when we talked about the gizmo option. I said that the gizmo works only with implicit surface mode, and now we have foam, which again is an atmospheric, and we have to use a slightly different approach. And in this case, it's just a matter of scaling the inner polygons of the glass a tiny bit to something like this. So I'll close this, and I'll stop that, and let's draw a region around this part so that we can check this later. So as I said, I'll scale the inner polygons of the glass a tiny bit, so I'll just select the glass, add an edit poly, and again I'll select the polygons by angle, and I'll ignore the back facing. So this time I'll select the inner ones and just scale them slightly. So 4 units will be enough, and let's rename this modifier to rendering, and let's hit render again. And the lines are now gone, and we now have this nice clean render, and I can start playing with the look of it, and I'll add some new lights, or actually I'll move the light that I have on the other side, move it somewhere here. Okay, and I'll switch the selection to lights only, and move the target up, and I'll introduce some decay to the lights now, and I'll use the inverse square decay, and I'll also turn off the overshoot and tighten the hotspot, and the fall off also, and yeah, let's move to some frame where I have more foam, and also turn off the render region and press render. Okay, it's rendering, but it's too dim right now, so I'll just increase the multiplier of the light to, let's say, 8, and render again. Okay, and this is with the first light, and now I'll add another. So I'll just switch to perspective, select the light, and press shift and move. I'll position this here, and move it down. Okay, and select the target, and I'll move it somewhere in the middle of the glass, and hit render. And this is the result with the second light, and I'll open the history window, and in V-Ray 3.0 you can change between the saved images by pressing the numbers on the keyboard. So if I press 2, I can see the result with the first light, and now with the second. I will add one more light, so I'll close these, and this time I'll duplicate the second light. So again, select the light, press shift and move, and I'll just move it up a bit, and I will also shrink the hotspot a little bit more, so I'll set this to 4, and I will also decrease the fall off to, let's say, 10, and I will also increase the multiplier to 10, and hit render. and that's the result with the third light. And I'll open the history window again and compare these. So this is with the first light, the second, and now the third. I will add some translucency to the beer material, however, because I don't like these dark areas here where we don't have foam. So the translucency will lighten up a bit. So I'll go to the material editor, press M on the keyboard, select the beer material, and here in the translucency I'll set the type to soft water, and for the backside color I'll just copy the fog color and paste this, and let's re-render. And this is the result with the translucency, and if I compare this with the previous one, you can see the foam is much smoother, and those dark areas are now gone. The render time increased from 3.5 minutes to 5 minutes, but nonetheless this is still a pretty good rendering time, considering that we are rendering 800,000 particles. So I'll continue with setting up the floor. I'll create a plane, give it a size, and place it in the center. And I'll also change the wire color to dark and give it a name. I'll create a very simple glossy material for this floor, so I'll create a V-Ray material and call this floor, change the diffuse to black and the reflect to white, and I'll also set the reflection glossiness to 0.9 and apply this material to the floor. And before I hit render, I will just disable the foam from the rendering so that I have some faster rendering, and I'll just draw a region here and press render. And you can see this is the floor, and I only want to keep the reflections underneath the glass, so I'll select the floor and go to the V-Ray properties and make this a matte object, and also matte for the reflection and refraction, and I'll invert the alpha, and let's render again. Okay, let's check the alpha, and right now we don't have alpha, so I'll get back to the V-Ray properties and check the affect alpha checkbox and click close, open again and render. And let's see now. Okay, and now we have the alpha. So I'll turn off the region and I'll add drops, and I've created those drops earlier using particle flow. It's nothing special, and I'll just add them now into the scene. So I'll select only the geometry, particle flow, and I'll create a very simple material for those, and I'll create a V-Ray material, call this drops, and I'll change the diffuse to black, the reflect to white, and the refract also, and I'll check the affect shadows, and I'll set the index of refraction to 1.2, and I will also check the reflect on backside and apply this to the drops. And also another thing is I want to inverse the gamma of the environment texture, so I'll set the inverse gamma to 0.45 to have more accurate result, and I can now press render. So guys, this is the final render, and this is now ready to be rendered as a sequence, and I actually already rendered this as an EXRs, and in the next part we will jump to Nuke and see how to add the Phoenix stamp, a background, and I'll also show you how to add some nice cool reflections on the glass. So see you in Nuke. Welcome to the final part of the Phoenix Beer tutorial. Here we are in Nuke, ready to composite. So before we start, I will just pay attention to those little squares that you see in the viewer, and these are part of the new personal learning edition, so don't pay a lot of attention to those, and let's just focus on the compositing. I'll start with adding the Phoenix stamp, so I'll press R to load it up, and there it is, Phoenix stamp. Click open and close this, and this is what the stamp looks like. And to merge these two together, I'll just select both and press M for the merge node, and you can see now that the stamp is on top of the glass, and that's exactly what I want. But I want to use the alpha of the stamp as a mask for that merge, and I will just simply take the mask input of the merge node and drag it over the Phoenix stamp. And now I can move the stamp on a more appropriate place, so I'll just select the stamp and press T for the transform, and I can take this and start placing it, but I'll just first make it smaller because it's very big. Okay, and that's fine, and I'll just set this to uneven, and I have this nice stamp now, but I want to have some reflections on top to make it part of the whole thing. So I'll open up a reflection path that I rendered separate from the beer, and here it is. Really quickly, I'll show you the scene setup for this, and here it is. So I've created these three planes that I used as reflectors, and I've assigned a V-Ray light material to those, and they cast these nice reflections on the glass. I only rendered one frame and added some render elements, but I ended up using only the reflection render element. So let me just show you how this looks. So this is the RGB pass, and here is the reflection render element. So I'll use this one to make some nice reflections on top of the stamp. Switch back to RGBA, and because I only want to use the reflection render element, and this is a multi-channel EXR, I can just extract it. So I'll use a shuffle, and I'll take only the reflection render element, and I will add a remove node, but set the operation to keep, so that I keep the reflection render element in the RGB channels. So close this, and I'll press Alt P to make a preview of that, and now I can merge these two together. So press M, and I'll just shuffle the inputs by pressing Shift X, and you can see that that reflections on the glass, but for now I just want to create those reflections to appear only on top of the logo. So again, I will use the mask input of the merge and plug it into the logo, and you can barely see those, but I will make them stronger by adding a grade node, and I will just bump up the gain. Okay, so this is better, and that's before and after. I can use this again to add some reflections on the glass this time. So select these and press Alt C to copy, and I will move them on the other side, and again I'll use the merge. So select both, press M, and this time, instead of boosting up the reflections, I will make them less strong by using the grade node again and decreasing the gain. Okay, this is better, and I'll just make these three merges with thumbnails, so that I have a better visual feedback of what each merge does. And let's reorder this a bit. Okay, now I can add some background, and I have prepared this blue one, so I'll just hit open. This is how it looks, and I'll merge it with the rest, so select both, press M, make a preview of this by pressing Alt P. I am almost done. I'll just add a grade node to the beer by pressing the G, and I will slightly increase the black point. Okay, and I will also add a color correct node by pressing the C, and I will boost the saturation just a little bit and the gain, but I'll set to affect not only the RGB but the alpha as well. And okay, so bump this a little bit more, and I will just decrease the contrast, and okay, and now that's better. And finally I can add a sharpen to make those bubbles stand out really nice, so I'll just decrease the sharpen to 2, and that's pretty much it. So it's been a long journey, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you learned new things, and I'll see you again.